She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're nothing, and you always will be." Not shouted, not angry, calm, certain, like she was stating a fact. For a long time, I believed her, because when the person who raised you becomes your first toxic parent, their voice doesn't just stay in your ears, it moves into your head. It becomes the way you see yourself. At that moment, I was 24 years old, standing in my childhood kitchen, holding a resignation letter from a job I hated but desperately needed. My hands were shaking, not from fear of the future, but from the familiar dread of disappointing her again. She laughed when she read it, a short laugh, sharp, almost amused. She told me I was delusional for thinking I could do more with my life, that people like me didn't get comeback stories, that success was reserved for people who were smarter, stronger, more disciplined, people who weren't me. Then she said something that changed everything. "You'll come crawling back," she said. "You always do." That sentence followed me for years. This isn't a story about instant revenge. There was no dramatic confrontation, no slammed doors, no screaming matches that made things feel resolved. This is a slow burn story, the kind that starts quietly and ends with success after betrayal so complete it feels unreal. Back then, I had no plan, no safety net, no one cheering me on. Just a small, stubborn voice inside me whispering, "What if she's wrong?" People love to talk about revenge like it's explosive, loud, satisfying in the moment. But the most powerful revenge doesn't look like revenge at all. It looks like silence, distance, growth no one expected. For years, she controlled the narrative of who I was, the failure, the disappointment, the one who would never measure up. And I let her. Because when you grow up under constant criticism, you start to believe pain is proof you deserve it, that love must hurt, that approval is something you earn by shrinking yourself. This story could happen to anyone, a daughter, a son, anyone who was taught to doubt themselves by the very person who should have protected them. I didn't become successful overnight. I didn't even believe success was possible for me at first. But something shifted the day she told me I was nothing. Not immediately, not dramatically, quietly. And that quiet change became the beginning of my comeback story, one she never saw coming. If you've ever been told you're not enough by someone who was supposed to love you, if you've ever stayed silent because speaking up felt dangerous, if you've ever dreamed of proving them wrong without saying a word, then stay with me. Because this isn't just about who I became, it's about what happens when a toxic parent underestimates the child they tried to break, and how success after betrayal can be the most devastating form of revenge of all. And this is where it really begins. Growing up, I thought every family sounded like mine behind closed doors. I thought every child learned to walk on eggshells. I thought love always came with conditions. My mother wasn't cruel in obvious ways. She didn't hit me, she didn't scream all the time. That's why it took me years to understand she was a toxic parent. Her weapon wasn't violence, it was words, tone, silence, comparison. She loved to remind me how much she had sacrificed, her youth, her dreams, her freedom, and somehow all of it was my fault. If I got good grades, she said it was expected. If I failed even once, she said it proved her point. If I dreamed too big, she mocked me. If I dreamed too small, she called me lazy. Nothing I did was ever enough, but she always convinced me it was my responsibility to try harder. By the time I reached adulthood, I was exhausted. On the outside, I looked functional. I held a steady job, paid my bills, smiled politely at family gatherings. People described me as quiet, reliable, sweet. They had no idea how loud my mind was. Every decision I made came with her voice attached. You'll fail. Don't embarrass yourself. Who do you think you are? When I got my first office job, she told everyone it was because of her guidance. When I came home drained every night, she told me that was just how life worked for people like me. She loved that phrase, people like you. The job paid the bills, barely. It also paid an anxiety. Long hours, no growth, no recognition. I watched coworkers get promoted while I stayed invisible, not because I wasn't capable, but because I was terrified of being seen. Success felt dangerous. If I tried and failed, she'd be right. If I succeeded, I wouldn't know who I was without her approval. That's how deep her control went. The idea of leaving that job didn't come from ambition. It came from survival. Every morning, my chest felt tight. Every Sunday night, I felt sick. I started losing sleep, then weight, then joy. But when I hinted that I was unhappy, she shut it down immediately. Be grateful, she said. Other people have it worse. Don't be dramatic. So I stopped talking. The resignation letter sat in my bag for weeks before that day in the kitchen. I rewrote it again and again, like the words might magically protect me from her reaction. They didn't. When she laughed at me and said I was nothing, it confirmed what I had always feared. In her eyes, I wasn't a daughter. I was proof of her disappointment. That was the moment our relationship cracked, not loudly, but permanently. I didn't leave the house that day. I didn't announce independence. I didn't declare revenge. I went back to my tiny room, closed the door, and sat on the floor in silence. For the first time, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if my life doesn't belong to her? That question didn't give me answers, but it planted the seed of my comeback story, one rooted not in rebellion, but in quiet defiance. And from that moment on, something felt off, like the ground beneath me had shifted. And I didn't yet know it, but the betrayal had already begun. After that day in the kitchen, nothing looked different on the surface. I still lived at home, I still went to work every morning, I still answered her questions politely. But something underneath had shifted. She started watching me more closely. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way she asked where I was going, who I was talking to, why I was on my laptop so late at night. Her questions sounded casual, but they carried an edge, like she was waiting for me to slip. That's how a toxic parent operates, not with rules written down, but with invisible boundaries you're punished for crossing. I had begun spending my evenings learning new skills online. Nothing dramatic, just quiet progress, free courses, late-night notes, a private notebook filled with ideas I hadn't shared with anyone, not even myself out loud. It felt dangerous to hope. One evening, she stood in my doorway without knocking. "You've been acting strange," she said. I asked what she meant. "You're quieter than usual," she replied. "That usually means you're planning something stupid." I laughed it off. I always laughed things off. It was safer that way. But she didn't laugh back. A few days later, she mentioned, casually, that she had spoken to my aunt about me, about how lost I was, about how worried she felt that I was becoming unrealistic. She said it like she was concerned, like she was protecting me. That was the first time I felt the sting of betrayal. She wasn't just doubting me in private anymore. She was controlling the story others heard about me. Suddenly, family members started calling with unsolicited advice, warnings, gentle reminders to stay realistic, to be careful, to not get ideas above my station. I hadn't told them anything. She had. And every time I tried to explain myself, I sounded defensive, unstable, exactly how she had framed me. That's when I realized something was deeply wrong. This wasn't love. This wasn't concern. This was sabotage. Still, I didn't confront her. Confrontation had never ended well for me. It only gave her more ammunition, more examples of how emotional I was, how ungrateful. Instead, I started pulling inward. I stopped sharing my thoughts, stopped reacting, stopped seeking approval. And she noticed. The comments became sharper. Don't embarrass yourself. You're not built for success. People don't just change their lives. Every remark landed heavier because this time I could see the pattern. She wasn't afraid I would fail. She was afraid I wouldn't. That realization hurt more than all the insults combined, because it meant the betrayal wasn't accidental, it was intentional. She needed me to stay small so she could stay right. And while she believed she was tightening her grip, she didn't realize something crucial. I had stopped asking for permission. This wasn't revenge yet. There was no confrontation, no escape plan announced. But in silence, my comeback story was taking shape. Every night, I worked quietly toward a future she didn't approve of. Every morning, I played the role she expected. And the more she underestimated me, the more dangerous that became. Because nothing fuels success after betrayal quite like being told over and over that you'll never amount to anything. Something was coming. She just didn't know it yet. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or tears. It arrived with a folder. I found it by accident. She had asked me to grab an old document from her desk while she was out. I didn't want to snoop. I never had. Privacy wasn't something I felt entitled to in that house. But when I opened the drawer, the folder was right there. My name was written on it, in her handwriting. That should have stopped me. Instead, my hands started shaking. Inside were printed emails, messages, notes, conversations she had been having about me, not to me, about me, with my former manager, with a distant cousin who worked in hiring, with a family friend who owned a small business. She had reached out to them quietly, framing it as concern, warning them that I was unstable, unreliable, going through a phase. She suggested I shouldn't be trusted with responsibility, that I might quit suddenly, that I wasn't ready. I felt sick. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't insecurity. This was proof. She hadn't just doubted me. She had actively worked to block my future. The weight of that realization crushed me. I sat on the floor with those papers spread around me, my heart racing, my chest tight. Every missed opportunity suddenly made sense. Every door that never fully opened. This was the real betrayal. And it came from the person who told everyone she loved me most. In that moment, every memory rearranged itself. Her helpful advice, her insistence on knowing where I applied, her constant need to stay involved. Control, disguised as care. I understood then why my attempts to move forward always felt like walking through fog, why progress slipped through my fingers no matter how hard I tried. I wasn't unlucky. I was being managed. When she came home, I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of her. I didn't confront her. I couldn't, because the pain was too sharp, and because something else had taken its place. Clarity. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd ever had. I saw the pattern clearly now. A toxic parent doesn't fear failure, they fear independence. I mourned the relationship I thought we had, the version of her I kept hoping would show up, the mother who would one day be proud. That version didn't exist, and that truth broke something in me, but it also freed me. I realized that if she was willing to sabotage my future behind my back, then I owed her nothing. Not my explanations, not my plans, not my dreams. The idea of revenge crossed my mind, but not the loud kind, not the kind that explodes and burns everything down. I wanted something else.
I wanted a life so solid, so real, so undeniably mine that her interference would no longer matter. That night marked the end of my silence as submission. From that moment on, my silence became strategy, and my comeback story stopped being a question. It became a decision. She still believed me to be nothing, and for the first time, I was okay with her believing that.
I didn't leave the house right away. I didn't announce a new life. I didn't cut her off or make threats. I became invisible. That was the first step of my revenge, and the most effective one. I stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped defending myself. When she criticized me, I nodded. When she mocked my ambitions, I smiled. When she warned me I'd fail, I agreed. Nothing disarms a toxic parent faster than losing their emotional leverage. Behind that calm surface, I was building something quietly, methodically, patiently. I took freelance work online under a name she didn't know. Small projects at first, bad pay, long hours, but every task taught me something. Every dollar I earned felt different, cleaner, mine. I opened a separate bank account. I saved obsessively. I told no one. That secrecy wasn't dishonesty, it was protection. At home, she grew strangely confident. My compliance reassured her. She believed she had succeeded, that I'd been scared back into place. She started making plans for me again, suggesting safe jobs, recommending I talk to people she approved of, dropping hints about how long I could stay under her roof. I listened without reacting, because the more she underestimated me, the safer I was. This phase of my comeback story was lonely. There were nights I wanted to give up, nights I questioned whether she had been right all along. But something had changed inside me. For the first time, effort led to progress. Slow, yes. Invisible, yes. But real. I learned to trust myself in small ways, to finish what I started, to fail privately and try again without being watched. That was the real damage her betrayal had done, not just blocking opportunities, but teaching me to doubt my own momentum. Rebuilding that trust took time. Months passed, then a year. My income stabilized, my skills sharpened. I was no longer surviving on hope. I was surviving on proof. And still, she had no idea. She continued telling people I was drifting, that I lacked direction, that I'd wasted potential. She said it confidently because she truly believed it. Every time she did, it fueled me. Not with anger, but with focus. This wasn't about humiliating her. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about success after betrayal so complete that it required no explanation. I began networking quietly, building a reputation she couldn't touch. My work spoke for itself, without her name attached to it. Opportunities came slowly, then all at once. A long-term contract, a recommendation, a real offer. Each one felt unreal, like stepping into a life I wasn't supposed to have. Through it all, I kept my silence, because silence had become my shield. This was the phase people never see in comeback stories, the boring part, the exhausting part, the part where you grow in the dark while everyone assumes you've already lost. She thought she was winning, and that was the most dangerous mistake she ever made. Karma didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with contrast. By the time my life started to change visibly, hers had already begun to crack. The first sign was subtle. She started complaining more about money, about stress, about people not appreciating her the way they used to. The authority she once held in our extended family was slipping, slowly, quietly. I noticed it the same way you notice the weather changing. Meanwhile, my success after betrayal had reached a point where hiding it no longer made sense. I got an offer I couldn't refuse, a role tied to a growing company, real stability, real respect, the kind of opportunity she used to say I'd never be capable of earning. I accepted it without asking for permission. When I told her I was moving out, she didn't react the way I expected. She laughed. Not kindly, not proudly. She said it wouldn't last, that the world would teach me my place. I didn't correct her. The day I left, I carried only what I needed. No speech, no accusations, no confrontation. I thanked her for everything and closed the door behind me. That was it. From that moment on, the gap between our lives widened rapidly. I worked hard, but for the first time, my effort translated into growth instead of punishment. My confidence followed naturally, so did peace. People started taking me seriously. My opinions mattered. My work spoke louder than her narrative ever had. And the irony? The same relatives she once warned about me began asking me for advice, referrals, help. Her version of me couldn't survive contact with reality. That's how karma works with a toxic parent, not through revenge-fueled destruction, but through exposure. She started asking questions. How was I affording my place? What exactly did I do for work? Why was I suddenly so busy? I answered politely, vaguely, truthfully, but without detail, because I didn't need her approval anymore. The real payoff came months later at a family gathering. Someone congratulated me, publicly, casually, on my work, on my progress. I saw her freeze. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. For the first time, she had no script, no warning, no narrative prepared, no way to minimize what was right in front of her. She couldn't claim credit. She couldn't call it a phase. She couldn't deny it. And I didn't say a word. That silence, earned, calm, unbothered, was my revenge. Not because she was humiliated, but because she was irrelevant. Her influence ended the moment my life stopped revolving around her belief system. That's the truth about karma. It doesn't punish loudly. It reveals quietly. And when it does, there's nothing a betrayer can do but watch. I didn't feel joy watching her lose control. I felt free. And freedom, I learned, is the most powerful ending to any comeback story. For a long time, I thought revenge would feel like victory, like satisfaction, like closure. It didn't. What I felt instead was something softer and deeper. Relief. Once I was fully on my own, the noise in my head began to fade. Not all at once, healing never works that way, but slowly, the voice that once sounded like her started to lose its authority. I stopped waking up anxious. I stopped apologizing for existing. I stopped measuring my worth through someone else's disappointment. That was the real success after betrayal. Not the job, not the money, not the recognition. It was peace. I didn't cut her off completely. I kept distance, not out of punishment, but out of necessity. Conversations stayed shallow, boundaries stayed firm. I no longer offered access to the parts of me she had once weaponized. And something unexpected happened. Without my emotional reactions to feed on, her behavior softened, not because she changed, but because she no longer had power. A toxic parent doesn't always lose by being confronted. They lose by being bypassed. I used to think my value depended on proving her wrong, on building a comeback story so undeniable that she'd finally admit she was mistaken. That admission never came, and I stopped needing it. I learned that some people will never clap for you, especially if your growth reminds them of their own limits. Waiting for their validation only keeps you tied to the very pain you're trying to escape. The betrayal didn't disappear from my memory. It became a reference point, a reminder of what control looks like, of how easily love can be confused with ownership. But it no longer defined me. What defined me was the choice I made when everything in me wanted to shrink, and I didn't. I chose silence over reaction, consistency over drama, growth over bitterness. That choice changed my life. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, know this: you don't need to announce your departure. You don't need permission to grow. You don't owe loyalty to someone who benefits from keeping you small. The most powerful revenge is living well without needing to explain yourself. And the most honest form of healing is realizing you were never broken, just buried under someone else's fear. I didn't become successful to prove her wrong. I became successful because I finally believed I had the right to try, and that belief was something no one could ever take from me. For a long time, I believed becoming successful would finally make the past hurt less. I was wrong. What healed me wasn't the money, it wasn't the title, it wasn't even the feeling of being right. It was realizing that my life no longer needed her approval to move forward. Some people don't betray you by leaving. They betray you by staying close and quietly making sure you never outgrow them. That's what makes success after betrayal so complicated. It doesn't erase the pain, it puts it into perspective. I still remember the day she told me I was nothing. Those words never disappeared. They just lost their power. Because every step I took afterward, every boundary, every quiet win, every choice made without permission, proved something far more important than being better than her. It proved I was always enough. If you grew up with a toxic parent, you know how confusing love can feel, how guilt disguises itself as care, how silence can be safer than honesty. And maybe you're still there, still doubting yourself, still waiting for the right moment to leave or to begin. So here's the only question that matters. If the people who doubted you never change, would you still choose to build your life anyway? I didn't tell my story to be admired. I told it for the person listening in the dark, wondering if quiet persistence is worth it. It is. And sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't being seen at all. It's being free. So tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place?